right, good afternoon, and thank you all so much for taking the time to join us this afternoon. Um, Today, we're going to go through a webinar to support the middle and high school bundling guides for science to support the release of that new resource. So first, before we jump into the work, some introductions. My name is Lark Widener, and I'm your Secondary Science Education Associate on the standards end of the Office of Assessment and Standards. For our team, we define that as secondary as 6 through 12. So any questions about standards or instruction, middle or high school, I'm your go-to person. And helping me this afternoon is I have a different face for some of y'all who've been to some of our science webinars. Brent is at a conference today, but I will turn it over to Chandra to introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Chandra Hall. I am the Elementary Math Education Associate. So Brent's counterpart, I guess, for math is my job. There's also another one of us. Her name is Kelly Skaggs. But hello all. I'm glad to be here.
So if you didn't know this, math and science are on a team together in the Office of Assessment and Standards. And with that, let's go ahead and open up and head to the chat and take a moment to introduce yourself. So in the chat, if you could tell us what your current position or job title is, and where are you sitting right now with the concept of bundling? So you might be a 1 where it's like bundling, what's that? Or you're experimenting, you can explain to a colleague, or if you're a 4, then you're an expert on bundling. So in the chat, what's your current position or job title, and where are you sitting with the concept of bundling? Let's see, I'm looking through the chat. We've got some 8th grade science teachers, department chairs, biology directors, chemistry teacher, mostly seeing 1s and occasional 2. Oh, chemistry and geometry.
Mm. Go math.
Go math. So our hope and our goal today is that you feel like you've taken a step forward in your understanding of the concept of bundling. So think about where you're rating yourself now, and then think about the goal for today being to take a step forward with the concept of bundling. Our learning targets for today to support that movement forward is being able to explain how bundling performance expectations supports authentic science learning. And we're going to talk about the where, what, and why of the new bundling guides for science. And if you've worked with myself or Brent before, you've probably seen this slide. We use it often because we think it's a really important message to reinforce as we talk about instructional strategies and supports for science. So a framework for K-12 science education influenced the development of the Next Generation Science Standards, or the NGSS, and our South Carolina College and Career Ready Science Standards 2021. From here on out, I'll just call them the Science Standards. As another note, the NGSS were referenced during the development of our science standards. But it's important to know that we are a framework aligned state and not an NGSS state. So what that means is, although we took a look at the NGSS, we made some edits, we made some additions, we may have taken some PEs out or rearranged them. This is especially important for middle and high school teachers because the NGSS are a grade band for middle and high school, but we are grade and content area specific here in South Carolina. So what that means is if you're ever looking at any resources for for support your science teaching that are aligned to the NGSS or developed for the NGSS, you need to closely check them for alignment to our science standards because there are some differences, particularly in middle and high school. And so in development of these 2021 science standards, there was a shift from learning about and treating science education or science as a body of facts to be memorized towards figuring out or asking students to apply the skills of scientists and engineers to figure out and understand the world around them. To support that shift, there were 3 key ideas that were used to develop the science standards. The first is core ideas, shifting away from a breadth of content to in-depth development of core ideas. And that development is going to be both across grades and within a single grade. So both across students' K-12 experience, along with in each of those individual grades, content areas, or courses. The second key development was moving towards developing explanations through investigation to make sense of phenomena, the use of our science engineering practices. This is a real big place of strength for South Carolina because we've had the science engineering practices since 2014. And even if you go all the way back to our very first set of science standards here in our state, we had the inquiry standards, right? So this idea of student-centered, student-driven learning in science has been a part of our state science standards for a very long time. And finally, this is probably the biggest or responsible for the largest amount of shifts between 2014 and 2021 is coherence. The idea that science learning is a logical progression where we build ideas over time and between those science disciplines. The end goal here is we want students to be able to put together information to explain phenomena or address problems. Our science standards are organized as performance expectations, and thus these function differently than traditional standards that we're used to. Performance expectations, or PEs, are guidance for what students should be able to do and understand. They are not learning goals. They are not instructional strategies. They are not objectives for a lesson, which is a different way to think about what's in a standards document than what we're used to. What I want you to really think about and internalize is that we don't teach PEs. We create learning experiences so our students can meet PEs. So in a number of our other content areas, you'll hear we don't teach the standards, we teach indicators, right? Well, science doesn't quite have those. The best way I can explain it is we don't teach PEs, we create learning experiences so students can meet PEs. So how do we get from these end of instruction goals, these descriptions of what students know and can do by the end of instruction, and that could be at the end of the unit, that could also be the end of the year or the course, to instruction. It's important to remember that PEs are not learning targets and they overlap with each other, and that's intentional. If you try to teach them as a list of skills, you're never going to finish. So if you try to start with the first one at the beginning of the year and just teach them as an independent list of skills, you will not finish by the end of the year or the end of your course. And it's important to note that they are not sequenced for instruction in the science standards document, and they are not a curricular scope or sequence. Nothing says you have to start with the first PE listed for your grade, content area, or course. So as you can see on the screen, I'm building out what 7th grade would look like if we just taught each PE by itself one at a time. They are not intended to be taught in isolation. They intentionally overlap with one another. In trying to teach them as a list of skills, we're going to have to rush through content, and we may entirely miss instruction on PE sequenced towards the end of the year. We don't have time to teach them as an ordered list. So now I want you to get ready to head to the chat. What comes to mind when you hear the phrase performance expectation bundle? So in the chat, what comes to mind? What's the first thing that pops into your mind when you hear the phrase performance expectation bundle?
Grouping, putting together, collection of ideas, combining PEs with content. The activities that will present the content, teaching combined and related content. A better way to cover content. Overarching ideas.
Great. Thank you.
How the information is related and intertwined.
Awesome.
Tracy.
Thanks. And so I just want to make sure we're all sort of starting from a shared definition, and this is actually pulled from the guide itself. So what do we mean when we say bundle? We're going to use the definition of a bundle as a set of PEs that provides students with coherent connections among concepts within and across disciplines. So a bundle is going to be more like an instructional unit, or some instructional materials call them modules. It's a little bit bigger than a chapter, right? So it might be multiple, what we would think of as chapters put together. We want to group these PEs together in manageable arrangements to help students and teachers look for connections between ideas that naturally exist in science and help students develop a more complete explanation of phenomena. So we're looking for that coherence, right, across disciplines. Particularly in middle school and K-5, it gets a little trickier in high school because, of course, in high school we break out into content-based coursework. But our K-8 standards are going to be integrated science courses. So what that means is they're going to have life science, physical science, and earth and space science performance expectations in each of those grades. More often than not, the physical science content you have in a grade is the underlying process of the earth science and the life science content. So if you take an earth science or a life science phenomenon and push students to that next lower level, that next level of understanding, that next level deeper of explaining that phenomenon, that is often where you're going to find your physical science content for K-8. Like I said, things get different in high school because we break out into content-based coursework. And so when we get into the guides, I'll explain how we're going to support that bundling of ideas across disciplines as well. So in support of that, we have a new resource. So Chandra is going to drop the link in the chat to our instructional resources page. You're going to come down and look for About This area under the new Bundling Guides for Science header. We have guides currently available for 6, 7, 8, Biology 1, Biology 2, Anatomy and Physiology, Chemistry, Physics, and Earth and Space Science. The K-5 guides are currently in development. So if you notice on the website, they say in development. So what I'd like you to do is go ahead and open up the guide that most closely aligns with your work. Because we're all going to start on the purpose and use page, and it's the same no matter which one you're looking at. So go ahead and open up the guide that most closely aligns with your work. And I want you to have that open because we're going to have another link coming in just a second. So Chandra is dropping a link to a forced copy of a note catcher. You are welcome to use this note catcher. It's going to make a copy for you in a Google Drive or a Google document. Or if you take notes in a different way, that is valid as well. I just wanted to sort of provide some guidance on our thinking through while we read the purpose and use page. So we're going to read the purpose and use page with our question being, what is the purpose of this resource? And I'm going to share my screen in case you haven't used a Google Doc with Google Drawings on it before. So if you've made your forced copy of the note catcher, thinking through the lens of what is the purpose of this resource, while you read the purpose and use page, I'd like you to write down or record for yourself 4 ideas worth sharing, 3 wonderings, ideas to think about from different perspectives, and something that changed the direction of your thinking. If you're using the digital note catcher, all you need to do to type into these shapes is double click the shape and it'll pop out to this screen. When you click inside of the drawing, then you'll be able to type. When you hit save and close, you'll see that what you've typed appears in the drawing. So as a reminder to type into the shape, you're going to double click. That'll open up a new screen. You click inside the drawing, and that's where you can edit and type in your reflection. Once again, if Google Drawings or digital notes are not your thing, you are more than welcome to take notes in whatever way works best for you. But I do want you to think about what is the purpose of this document and think through what are some ideas worth sharing, any wonderings that you have, ideas that you might want to think about from a different perspective, and something that changed the direction of your thinking. While the presentation loads, we're going to send y'all to breakout rooms. So what I would like you to do in your breakout room is to take 5 minutes to do a close reading of the purpose and use page. It's only 1 page, but remember, we're looking through these lenses of ideas worth sharing, wanderings, different perspectives, changes in thinking. So take 5 minutes to do a very close reading, maybe a couple rounds, a couple times reading the purpose and use page. After that 5 minutes is up, I'd like you to discuss in your breakout room what you've written down. So how would you answer the purpose of this resource? How would you answer this question? Discuss that with your breakout room. And I'd like for you to be prepared to summarize your group's discussion when you return. So you probably want to assign somebody to be the speaker for the group, because I'm going to ask for some groups to summarize their discussion when we come back into the main meeting. So that's 5 minutes to read, 5 minutes to discuss. I will send out 2 and 1 minute warnings before you get brought back into the main group. Before we send you to breakout rooms, is there any need for clarification on the task? All right, and welcome back to the main room. So I'm going to ask for at least 2 groups to volunteer and share a summary of their discussion around the purpose and use page of the bundling guide. And just as a reminder, I set minimums and not maximums for sharing. So just because we get to 2, if you still have something to add to the conversation, please feel free to also share. So I need at least 2 groups to summarize their discussion. All right, I see a hand up for KK.
We talked about within our group just how PEs are related across the content and how they're more focused on the student learning with what they're actually able to do in science versus the rote memory.
Great, thanks. So y'all's discussion really centered around like what the PEs describe in terms of what students both do and know and how it looks cross content for
Yes.
science. Great, thank you. All right, I see an LF.
Hi. Excuse me, my allergies are getting the best of me today.
I
So if I cough, I'm
understand.
sorry. So we discussed how we're naturally bundling already by combining standards in various units across units. So, if it naturally occurs that we talk about, gosh, I can't remember specifically the unit that we discussed, then we just lend ourselves to that natural process of teaching within another unit. So I guess we were bundling already and didn't know it.
Great. So your group sort of discovered that, hey, we've already been kind of doing this. We were naturally sort of putting ideas together within a single unit instead of trying to check off a list of things. Is that a fair summary?
Correct.
Thank you. Just a reminder, I set minimums, so I'll leave the awkward silence open in case anyone else wants to share. Oh, got another hand up. Perfect. I think it's RO.
So we discussed, we got a great director in our team. So he shared with us some alignment about this bundling one. It is looking like exactly what he said was project-based learning. Because I worked under project-based learning in the past 1 or 2 years from another school district. So I have some idea. I did in math part the project-based learning. But we worked in different, even the biology, we did the project-based learning that time. So this is like bundling like 4 or 5 standards on 2 subjects, because I saw the English and ELA and social studies, they have done the project-based learning like 2 content areas when we will club together. So how the standards looks like for both the classes, because ELA is like a 10th grade and social studies is like 9th graders. That was like a little combination part of that one.
Great, thanks. So you guys, your group sort of found a connection to the instructional strategy of project-based learning and sort of discussed around that and some of y'all's experiences with that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, and I see another hand up for LB.
Yes, our group talked about the fact of it being one of the purpose, one of the initial purposes of that, the purpose and use is the resource is being more of a guide for teachers at the beginning. If you have no idea what you're reading, at least it gives you kind of a guide through how to incorporate the SCPs, the PEs, the CCCs as you are looking at your content.
Great, thanks. So your group really focused in on its intended use as a guide and not a mandate, but it's a sort of starting point for discussion or discovery, particularly if you're new to the field or new to maybe even a content area. Would that be a fair?
Yeah.
Great.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. So I heard some of my sort of take-home message ideas. So really thinking through like what the bundle guides are and what they are not. So they are examples of how the PEs could be bundled for a grade, course, or high school content area. They are not the only way the PEs could be bundled, right? So you may look at other resources that have bundled the PEs in a different way, and that is okay. This is just an example of how they could be bundled. What they are representations of an iterative process undertaken by South Carolina science educators. So this is the product of some work by educators from across our state, and we are going to speak briefly about the process that they used, and that process is actually outlined for you in that purpose and use guide as well. As one person said, they are guides for instructional and assessment design. So once again, they are not mandates. but they are guides of different ways to put together pieces of information, potentially for instructional, but also potentially for assessment design. Maybe they lend themselves to designing a stimulus for a performance task, right? Looking at trying to collect multiple data points from a single task or assessment. What they are not is they are not prescriptions about how to bundle PEs. They're not the only way to bundle. They are not a set of perfect documents, and they are not a curricular scope or sequence. Another note about how they were created, when we jump into them, you're going to notice that they're very much tied to content. That was intentional by the group because science teachers, particularly middle and high school science teachers, tend to come from a strength point of understanding science content. But there are other ways to bundle the performance expectations, particularly looking through the lens of those science engineering practices and the cross-cutting concepts. But this set of bundled PEs in this guide are primarily content-based. So I told you we were going to talk about the iterative process. So how did we develop these guides? What did we go through? We used a sort of stepwise system that's been outlined in some research. So our first step was, let's review the bundles that already exist. You do not have to use someone else's bundle, but why not work smarter instead of harder, right? Some examples of bundles that already exist. Your high quality instruction materials are generally bundled. There are also a number of open education resources. Some examples of those include NextGen Storylines, OpenSciEd. Some of the ones we specifically looked at are listed as references at the end of the documents, right? But there are other bundles that exist, and so be open to looking at those too. This is not saying you have to bundle these PEs in this way. Step 2 is when we are working through the process of bundling, we always want to think around a phenomenon. We want to bundle around a phenomenon. We want to think about what are students trying to figure out through this bundle. And we really want to focus on selecting phenomena that matter to our students, right? So sometimes you may see a bundle or come across a bundle, and the phenomenon isn't meaningful to the students in your classroom. Or maybe it's just not a context through which they would experience that thing. For example, maybe there's a bundle that's centered around skiing. How often are we skiing in South Carolina, right? But oftentimes you can find another phenomenon that you could use with that same bundle, right? So you always want to center bundling around phenomena. What are students trying to explain? What are they trying to figure out through learning in this bundle? As you're building bundles or looking through bundles, we want to explore and look for those unexpected relationships among the performance expectations we're responsible for. For some of our PEs, it can be really difficult to find a phenomenon from the surface. Oftentimes, we're going to have most difficulty with those physical science PEs, right? Because they're often describing things that are happening at a very small scale. But what if we look for those relationships between physical science and life sciences, right? So for example, what if you're bundling the understanding of chemical reaction PEs through the lens of photosynthesis and respiration? So we want to look for those unexpected relationships among the PEs, those times where our physical science content is the underlying process of what we're observing at the life science and the earth and space science phenomenon. So that also leads into step 4, which is bundling across disciplines whenever we can and calling that out for ourselves and for students. I often think back to my own experience with having the content areas of biology, chemistry, physics, particularly being treated as very separate things. And I didn't really understand why, as an animal sciences major, I had to learn all this chemistry and physics. Like, it didn't make sense. What am I doing with this? And then I got to animal nutrition, which is just organic chemistry, and biochemistry. And it was like a light bulb turned on. And I was like, now I understand why I had to learn all that chemistry and physics content. But because that wasn't made clear to me, it sort of made it harder, I think, for me to learn that content. I didn't really get it until I understood how it was the underlying process of what I was most interested in learning. The final thing you want to do is make sure each PE is in at least one bundle. So this means that when we are thinking through the process of bundling, particularly as a planning strategy, how we're going to plan our instruction for an upcoming school year or chunk of time, we got to look longer range than what we're teaching tomorrow or what we're teaching next week. We don't want to wind up with 1 or 2 PEs without a place to go, right? And we just tack them on to the end of the year and move on with our lives. So oftentimes bundling and even planning for 3-dimensional instruction in general is going to require more of that long range planning, looking at the entire course and trying to figure out where are we going to make sure students have the experiences they need to meet the performance expectations we are responsible for. So this is just the slide we saw earlier of 7th grade laid out in a side by side. So why bundle? We're going to bundle to save time. There is no one correct way to bundle performance expectations. So the bundles in this resource are examples. And you can be creative in your approach to bundling, right? So if you see relationships that the committee didn't call out, please feel free to explore those relationships. Sometimes you want a different phenomenon and that leads you to a distinct bundle. That is, your creativity is really helpful here in the development of bundles for student learning. The other thing to remember is this is just the beginning, right? So this is just the beginning of the work. Now we sort of take this idea and we use it to help us develop instruction and develop assessment. So this is just the starting point. The work is not done. But I remind you to refer to your high quality instruction materials or any of the open ed resources. Oftentimes they have examples of how bundles can work through instruction and assessment. So we're going to do a waterfall in the chat. So I want you to head to the chat and get ready to type, but do not hit enter until I say waterfall. So in the chat, I'd like you to say respond to the question, how can we use these guides? What are some uses? What are some ideas you have right now about using these guides? So type, but don't hit enter yet. I know it's really hard. Don't hit enter yet. Trying to give everybody a chance. If you're still typing, that's okay. Keep typing and waterfall. So as the responses from your colleagues and peers are coming in, let's take a scroll through the chat and give them a reaction on what they said. So if you click on the chat, you can then react to it.
Ooh, I see a heart emoji and a thumbs up for we can use the guides to help us plan our instruction for next year to gain ideas for what PEs naturally fit together. The explanation within each bundle helps me to make sure that I am fully reaching the PE expectations. Ooh, another heart and thumbs up. The guide offers interesting connections that I might not have thought about before. This can help direct future units.
And I see a couple centered around the idea of vertical planning with science teachers, using this to help facilitate those sorts of processes.
Robert says starting point for collaborating with other teachers in other content areas.
And looking up earlier, so some people were really fast on the inner, around some ideas around planning for a curriculum, developing maybe some spiral review opportunities for students, thinking about maybe looking at what I'm going to teach next year and using them to create a newer unit of study, some different phenomenon ideas. So starting to think about maybe we could use this to help with our planning for next year. Yeah, so I completely agree. I think these are a starting point for planning for our instruction and potentially planning and developing some assessment. I think they provide a way to conceptually align science content, particularly if there's some content you're responsible for that you don't have the highest comfort level with. The goal here was to help sort of provide you with some of that conceptual alignment within your grade or content area. I think they can be used as sense-making tools for teachers around what they're responsible for and to sort of guide that thought process that we also ask our students to use, right? So making sense of things. And I really think they are going to help keep us from thinking of the performance expectations as a checklist, right? So really presenting this idea of we're teaching multiple things at the same time because they naturally fit together, not checking off a list of tasks to get done by the end of the year. And I do think they also help provide some basis for a conceptual flow, once again, helping with those starting points for discussions, planning, vertical work even as we move forward. So great ideas. Y'all pretty much hit every one of the ideas I had on the slide in the chat. And now I just want to take a moment to reflect. So even if you're not currently in the classroom, think back to when you were in the classroom and when you were trying to organize instruction, right? So when you were thinking through the process of how am I going to organize instruction for this upcoming year? So reflect on how does a bundle compare to your previous thinking about instructional organization? And you're welcome to head to the chat, but I am going to ask for at least 4 people to unmute and share their reflection on how bundling compares to our previous thinking about instructional organization.
I'll unmute and share.
Thank you.
For me, as I think about bundling, especially when you put up the example with 7th grade standards, I think for me it taps in. I think we naturally do it anyway, but it allows prior knowledge. It's almost like in the beginning of the year, you ask questions about certain things at the beginning of the school year, but it pulls from a standard, just checking to see where they are, and then grouping those concepts of what they may already know or don't know and how it still fits in, and showing them how it fits in where they currently are.
Great, thank you so much. And let's give is it Latoya? I'm sorry. Yeah, let's give Latoya a reaction in the meeting for being brave and sharing, because it can be scary to have to share your own idea. All right, I see another hand up for YB.
Actually, I was trying to congratulate Latoya, but I'll go ahead.
I tricked you. Okay.
Actually, I'm using it now. Looking at the bundling aspect, for example, I'm tying some ideas together as I'm working on a project called The Literacy of Science. And what I'm trying to do is marry the idea of the book of the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks to the cellular division, the BLS 1-4. And that takes us back to the purpose and the use statement about how I think it was the first paragraph talked about developing a theme that connects within context as well as outside for cross-curricular development. So not only am I looking for ways to connect it within the content, which would be, as we talk, not only talking about cell division, but differentiation and relationships, but also connections to other content.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. And let's give Yolanda a reaction in the main room. There we go. All right. Still waiting on 2 brave volunteers at least. Okay, I see an SL.
That's me. So I think that when you first asked us about our experience with bundling, I don't know what I was thinking. I said I was a 1, but now that you've explained it in a little bit more depth, I think that a lot, at least here at my school, we're doing this. So we look at which standards make sense to cover together and where the interconnections are so that we can build those or help our students build those connections. Most of my summative assessments are project-based assessments anyway. And so giving students an opportunity to really work on doing science and understanding science from that functional capacity. I guess I thought that I wasn't doing it, but I guess I am. Now, there's certainly lots of room to improve. And I mentioned in my breakout room that we're working on something that I call Astronomy 101 for my students. So we're covering Earth, Sun, and Moon. We're covering Earth and its place in the universe. But there's also an opportunity here to discuss waves and to pull in another standard. And a year or 2 ago, I wouldn't have seen that. But this year, I'm seeing it a little bit more. And I'm like, oh, we can cover that. And we can do electromagnetism when we're talking about gravity and how gravity works within planets and here on Earth, et cetera, et cetera. So your explanation today has helped me see that we're actually doing this. We can be better, but we're doing it, which is like super helpful to not feel like I'm, panicking and have to do more or, more with less or less with more, which never happens, but
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. And can we give Shannon a reaction in the main room? Well, it's so nice to hear the realization of, oh, I was already doing this, right? Doesn't feel like it's one more thing on my plate. It's actually something I'm just growing in instead of figuring out for the first time. And I see a hand up for CH. See if it'll let me. It might be Cheryl Harrison.
She said her mic isn't working.
Oh, okay. If you want to add your reflection to the chat, myself or Chandra can read it out to the whole group. And while she's typing, if someone else wants to share their reflection. Oh, I see another hand up. Oh, and it went away.
Uh-oh, I'll go. This is Cheryl.
Okay.
It went, I said, I don't know what happened to my hand. It doesn't want to play. So I started looking at the bundling with my kids because of the amount of time I had and the fact that I had to teach a whole piece about ecology. And so I started talking with and looping that with genetics. I did a lesson about tuskless elephants and how the fact that they are now surviving, elephants are surviving because they're tuskless. They were being hunted for their tusk. And I found that there were tons of, I was covering all of the standards I needed to cover with a lesson on tuskless elephants, like with the phenomena of tuskless elephants.
Great. Thank you so much. So you were able to sort of find how you could use a phenomenon to really get, particularly when you start pushing for that deeper understanding, you can get a lot done with a single phenomenon.
Right. You can cover the genetics concepts. You can talk about evolution. You can also talk about the ecology pieces. So it worked out well.
Thank you so much for sharing. And if we can give Cheryl a reaction in the main room. And then Cheryl Harrison got her comment in, which is, in the past, content was a checklist. Now it's more application of content and cross-curricular connections. And I see one more hand up for SB, and then we will probably head to our last activity for the meeting. So SB, take the mic.
Yes, quickly, I was going to say what you just said, the application of it. It also helps students with a deeper understanding and the whole connection. With me, I will look at, because I tried to differentiate a lot in my class. So I think that'll come in a lot with giving students an opportunity to, be able to have a deeper connection with the big picture and adding different, not just the subject, but different parts. Like, for instance, if I'm teaching something and I move ahead into the other part, it's like connecting it, then I think they'll, be able to do more accountable talk and differentiate with that. In other words, have a little something for everybody and not just that traditional way of teaching. So I think the differentiation would probably be a big piece.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. We have one more reflection in the chat. It helps to sort of weed out some of the extraneous information. In the past, I used a textbook as a guide for planning, but the race to cover everything was always difficult and frustrating. Using PEs helps focus on the most important concepts and helps to show how interconnected all of the topics and subjects are. All right. Well, now before we end our session for the day, let's actually go take a look at a bundle. So head back to the browser where you have whatever bundle guide you were looking at open, and go ahead and scroll down to one of the actual bundles. I just want to point out sort of what the features are of these, and then what you're sort of looking at on each page. And Chandra has redropped the resources link in the chat if you need to go find a bundle document again. So go ahead and scroll down to a bundle. I would try to pick one that's all on one page, but that's not entirely required. So I have on here a bundle from 7th grade looking at ecosystems and a bundle from chemistry looking at the structure and properties of matter. I picked these honestly because they all had the features I wanted to point out on one page. They're very similar, but there is a difference between middle and high school that I want to make sure is really clear. So up at the very top, you're going to find the bundle title. This is just to give you an idea of sort of where we're sitting content. Thank you. So we're just going through and actually talking about the pieces of a bundle. So if you want to open up a bundle guide and scroll down to one of them, I think you'll be able to see. All right, I'm going to reshare my slides and see if that helps with the slide viewing issue.
Apparently several people couldn't see.
All right, how about
Interesting.
now?
Yes.
Okay, come on teams, it's Tuesday. It's not Monday anymore.
Mhm.
All right, if you can't see, that's okay. We are just looking at an actual bundle within the document. So the first thing you want to find is the title of the bundle. That's going to be at the very top of the page in bold. They're not very fun. They're just kind of descriptive titles of what we're looking at. Just beneath the title, you're going to find a paragraph roughly of some information. We call this the bundle narrative. It's going to help sort of explain how these performance expectations in the bundle are connected or the relationship they share. The bundle narrative is very much grounded in content because these bundles are primarily content based. So it's going to sort of be a narrative about how the content of these different performance expectations is connected within that bundle. Just below that bundle narrative or that paragraph of information is where you find the performance expectations or PEs aligned to this bundle. We have two different classifications of these PEs, fully met and partially met. Fully met PEs are intended to be fully met through the bundle. So what that means is students should be able to know and do what that PE describes by the end of the bundle. Partially met PEs, however, are not intended to be completed by the end of the bundle. Those are going to be marked with an asterisk next to the statement. What that means is maybe this is some stuff you're introducing in an early bundle, or it's an understanding you're circling back to at a later bundle. And there are a couple PEs that it's like you can't really hit them all at once. They don't make sense. So in order to make sure they don't stand alone as like a random thing, we might be hitting pieces of that PE throughout the year, depending on the context of other bundles. So all that means is I would not expect students to fully meet that one PE at the end of this bundle. And depending on how you're sequencing instruction, that could potentially be introducing a concept and then following up and really fully meeting it later. Or it may be a concept that they've already interacted with and met, but we're reinforcing that understanding in another bundle at another time. So that's what those partially met or those asterisk statements PEs are. We're going to skip a section in high school and jump down to the example anchoring phenomena to support 3D instruction. So that is exactly what these are. They are just examples of phenomena. They are not an exhaustive list. We were trying to think of some unique or unusual ideas, things you may not necessarily find if you're looking at instruction materials that are already out there. Potentially maybe even like something, maybe I don't want to teach with this bundle, but I like the idea of trying to assess with this bundle, right? So we tried to sort of give a variety of phenomena examples. There tend to be 2 to 3 examples, trying to reinforce this is not a list of every possible phenomenon, but just some ideas, some starting points, some example phenomena that students should be able to explain if they worked through the PEs in this bundle. The final thing that is special for high school, because our high school courses are organized by content area, so we don't really have fully integrated science courses very often in high school, to sort of support this idea that we are going across disciplines to develop understanding, we have a section in the high school bundles for connected PEs from additional content areas. So these are performance expectations that are in other content areas or courses that share a valid connection with the PEs in this bundle. So it could be that you are maybe pre-exposing students to some content they'll see in a later course, depending on your school or your district's course sequencing for high school, right? Or potentially you are coming back to something they saw in an earlier course that you could sort of remember when you experienced this in biology 1, right? And now we're in chemistry. Well, now let's take a deeper dive into that here in the context of chemistry. So really trying to reinforce that science is not silos. The disciplines are not silos. They interact, they have relationships, they work together to build our understanding of the natural world. and sort of showing where we might be introducing some concepts earlier in high school, depending on course sequencing, or reinforcing or going deeper with something at a later course as well. And so with that, I'm going to pause for a few minutes to give y'all a chance to sort of digest this information that's in a bundle and open up the floor for any questions or needs for clarification.
I have a question. I just wanted to know
Mhm.
what you just stated about the high school. Is that also done in the middle school level as well?
So since middle school is already those integrated science courses, you'll just see multiple content areas in a bundle.
Okay.
So you might see some PS for physical science, LS for life science, ESS for earth and space science.
Gotcha.
You said something about the P's earlier about which ones that have the asterisks are the ones we should that's aligned to our bundle versus those that are not.
So if you look in the PEs aligned to this bundle, and it's not true for every bundle,
Okay.
you'll have some that are just like the PE statement. So that means that PE is fully met through the intent of the bundle. But every once in a while, you'll have one that has a little asterisk next to it.
Okay.
So we're identifying those as partially met, so that maybe you're introducing some ideas here that you maybe follow up with and go deeper on later in your course. Or potentially maybe you're circling back to something, spiraling back in some content you may have covered earlier.
Okay. Because I was looking for it as you was saying it. That's why.
I should be clear, that's not on every single bundle either.
Okay. Thank you.
partially met. I have one more question. So when we think about like a pre and post test, would it be good to use those alignments for that?
Yeah, so that could be one way too to look at this is maybe I want to use the context of a phenomenon in a bundle to pre-assess my students and try to gather as much data as I can across all these different PEs in a single assessment. And then maybe, or potentially using one of these bundles as an assessment later, right? Showing can they truly transfer their understanding to a bundle they maybe didn't encounter instructionally.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. If you have any other questions or needs for clarification as we're closing up for the day, feel free to add those to the chat. Even if I can't get it answered in the meeting, I will try to reach out to you and get you an answer. With that, we're going to do some clarity and closure. So head to the chat. This is where you're going to respond to some of these prompts. I'm sharing a different screen now. If you can't see the screen, I will read the prompt you're going to respond to in the chat. So I'm going to roll my dice. And we've landed on 1. So in the chat, I'd like you to name one new thing you learned today. So head to the chat, one new thing you learned today.
What a bundle is. Most of them are bundling.
I like the person who said that the bundling document exists on the state website. Some people reflecting that I learned today that I was already doing this. All right, I'm going to roll the dice again. We landed on 3. In the chat, can you describe something that pushed your thinking outside of your comfort zone? So number 3 is describe something that pushed your thinking outside of your comfort zone. So we've got some comments about maybe using the PEs for vertical alignment, thinking through some of the phenomenon supports, maybe thinking through the idea of assessment, moving towards more performance-based. Using this to help with a more in-depth conversation with a PLC. Connection of content areas or introduction of a topic, and then actually going back and fully addressing it later. The idea that maybe we should sometimes present students with a bundle different than what we're currently doing. All right, I'm going to do one more roll. Oh, we already did number 1. We already did number 3. Number 2. So in the chat for our final clarity and closure, if you could describe 2 ideas from today's learning experience. So if we can describe 2 ideas from today's learning experience. I've got somebody who wants to steal my clarity and closure with the dice. We've got that PEs are not objectives and not a scope and sequence, that our role is to create learning experiences and try to look for as many cross-disciplinary relationships as we can with the PEs.
Bundling equals best practices, doing more with less time.
Opportunities to cover more PEs and some spiraling through that coursework. Thank you all so much for engaging in the chat.